Algorithms are finicky bastards, and so even if you're subscribed to me, even if you've clicked the bell and gone through all the other rigmarole, even if you follow me on social media, you might not see what I'm up to. So I have a mailing list. Postmortem-studios-fan-group, which is a bit of a mouthful, but all you have to do is navigate your way there once at groups.google.com and subscribe, and then once a month you will get an email with everything that I've done in the previous month. And isn't that special? Hello lovelies, let's talk Mythic Odysseys of Theros, which apparently is an ancient Greek word meaning summer or warm weather or something. Now this is a D&D supplement based upon Magic the Gathering, which is something that people have been crying out for a very long time, though the enthusiasm I don't think is quite there anymore to the same degree that it was. Now, I never played Magic the Gathering. I did always like the artwork and so on, so I welcome this. More material is always good. But it seems to lack a lot of the depth and sophistication that something like Planescape or Dark Sun and so on had. Perhaps that's a reflection of the more shallow world development that goes into Magic cards and so on. Or perhaps it's just a reflection of the market as a whole and costs and margins and all of that kind of boring outside the actual play of the game sort of thing. Now, I never played Magic, like I said, so I'm not particularly invested in Theros or Magic the Gathering or anything really to do with it. So I'm assessing this book more upon my enthusiasm for Ray Harryhausen films, my understanding of mythology and so on, though Greek mythology isn't my absolute favourite, it is up there. And this is ancient Greece, but dialed up to 11, I mean even beyond the mythology that we're used to, creating a mix between the kind of high magic stuff that we're used to from modern D&D and the Greek mythology, which could get over the top at some points as well. I think they've dialed it up perhaps a little too high. I have a tendency these days to prefer something grittier normally within my personal games. Eretech's a bit of an exception, but I set out to make it something different. And the high level of magic and competence and so on doesn't really bring to mind ancient warriors, Bronze Age warriors, or even the 300 Spartans and so on, because there's so much of an emphasis on the magic and the mystical that it kind of overshadows everything else. The Greek warrior, whether a rogue or a fighter in D&D parlance, should really be the character that people want to play, I think, and I don't get that feeling from this, which is a little upsetting, perhaps, but only a little. Now, characters in Theros have additional capabilities that don't exist within other settings. They have heroic drives, which is sort of a motivation, again, dialed up to 11. They probably have some sort of divine gift, like you might have been constructed by their Hephaestus analogue, or you might be blessed by the gods. You might have a godly bloodline, though that's not particularly explored well in this. You might want to import something from Birthright, if you can find those old books anywhere, to create that kind of godly bloodline of demigods, or create a separate race of demigods if you wanted to, something like Asimars and Tieflings, but twist them and adjust them a bit according to which god you're the progeny of. That would be a way to go about it, but that would take a little bit of fiddling here. And in addition, you have piety, which is probably the most interesting thing in the entire book and the most portable thing, other than the monsters, in the entire book. Piety is your devotion and favour from your god, and it grants you certain bonuses and capabilities to depict exactly how much favour you have from that god. Now, all of this means that the Theros' characters tend to be somewhat more powerful than even normal 5th edition D&D characters, and I think there's enough between piety, drives, and gifts that you probably need to up the ante on encounters a little. Perhaps 10% extra XP budget for monsters for encounters. Or maybe even treat the characters as being a level higher than they actually are when you're putting those adventures together. You get some racial options. Some of these are already familiar from older versions of D&D. You get Centaur, Leonin, so that's now there's 2 cat races in D&D. Play to that Nico demographic. Minotaurs, which would be good for the Dark Sun enthusiasts out there. Satyrs, maybe I should have worn my goat horns for this, but I look more like Satan or Krampus than a satyr. And Tritons, of course, which have been in D&D since forever, usually as monsters. They're races. They have some scant cultural information, but they suffer from a lot of the problems that races in D&D have had of late, in that they are kind of toned down, less differentiated from the other races, and this is due to wokeness. There's no getting around it, whatever you want to call it. Woke scolding. Oh, races shouldn't be all that different, blah, 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 which means your racial choice largely becomes irrelevant, unless perhaps in this case if you're a centaur, because trousers are going to cost at least twice as much if you're a centaur, put it that way. Character creation options, there's a few new options and things. There's athlete as a background. There's a new college for bards. I was a bit disappointed to see that there was no character class for philosophers. I thought that could have been interesting. You could have had a philosophy schools of barding or something else where you reflected the different schools of philosophy, like Stoicism, Epicureanism, and so on, and that have something relating to them. So that might be something fun to add in for yourself if you want to. I think bards make a good stand-in for philosophers, but personally I would see philosophers as trying to understand the world as it is, so the tendency for bards to use magic doesn't necessarily fit with the role of a philosopher. Perhaps you could have some sort of scaled sort of bonuses depending which school of philosophy you belong to, with the basic stats and so on from the bard, all the non-magical stuff from the bard, and then maybe you get bonuses to saving throws or additional hit points if you're a stoic and so on. That could be fun to do, but yeah, it's not in here. This is me riffing off it because that's what this is probably most useful for, is inspiration. The gods are all laid out. They're thinly veiled Greek gods. Why they were coy making Theros, of making it the actual Greek gods, I don't know. I'm pretty sure they do list real world gods of the past, mythological ones, in D&D 5th edition. I think in the back. They certainly did in previous editions. So the coyness is a bit odd. Are we really that concerned about upsetting a handful of Greek pagans? I don't know. I did like that there was the option to play a character who is against the gods, an iconoclast. And I could see a really fun high-level campaign, because I was going to write a game on this theme at one point. I could see a really fun campaign where you're a group of iconoclasts determined to overthrow the gods. A sort of God of War situation, if you like. That could be a lot of fun. But yeah, you get the ability to resist certain forms of magic and effects of the gods and so on with that. That was a nice touch, and I was glad to see that, because I tend to not like gods. The piety mechanic is really interesting, and that's really portable between different games, and I think despite the fact that it gives characters more powers and so on, you can adjust your encounter budget accordingly. But if you want to center gods and have interventionist gods in your game in any setting, then I think incorporating piety into that setting is probably a good idea, and you can nick ideas and reskin them from the piety bonuses for the various gods in here. And of course, it gives you a little extra something to spice up any enemy cults or whatever you might find in your games. The piety scale runs up to 50, I think. Bonuses are at 3, and then it's broken down further up. So I'm not sure how you would assign that to monsters. You determine whether they had a faith or something at all, probably. Then their challenge rating, maybe double it for their faith rating. Their piety score, perhaps. That might be one way to do it. It doesn't feel quite right, but that's one way you could maybe incorporate that. And of course you can create the piety bonuses for the various evil gods and jot that in. Probably best to go for more simple bonuses for gods that monsters are likely to worship. The section on the lands is a little thin, but it's useful, and that suits me because it's not too defined, and that leaves room for you to make it your own. Maybe a bit of a cop-out as a criticism or a supporting thing to say about the book, but I like a little bit of room to do my own thing. Adventure writing for Theros is going to be quite difficult, I think. They do give you lots of tips and ideas, and they are based around Greek mythology, but the presence of divine assistance, heroic drives, omens, aid from the gods, piety, all of that means you really need to up the ante in the fights. More low-level bad guys, and I think Greek mythology and video games that are based on Greek mythology, what they do really well is they create these really engaging boss battles. So I would probably structure your adventures to be talk to the people who are being ravaged or preyed upon by whatever awful creature it is, get involved in their political machinations and shenanigans, like as happens in a lot of the Greek myths. Go to investigate the monster, find the monster, maybe you pick up some tips on how to defeat it earlier, skirmish with some minor things, deal with some traps, some terrain and so on, and then arrive at a deadly encounter final boss, and really make the environment part of the battle, as happened in God of War and the old PS3 Conan game. The boss battles are really memorable in those. That's the way I would probably structure an adventure, a regular Monster of the Week adventure for Theros. There's a nice bestiary, particularly for those of us who like classic monsters, and that's a welcome addition to any game. So, style. It's well presented, it's clear, it's readable. There's a few jarring things about the illustrations that wouldn't be so jarring if it wasn't set in Rome rather than Greece. But of course it's a fantasy version, so you can get away with that. So overall I think style would be a 4. It's nothing outstanding, but it's a good level of sort of A-level producer art and layout. Substance, it is a little thin, but that's a good thing. But still, I can't really give it anything over a 4 for that either. So that's 4 for style, 4 for substance. That's 8 out of 10, or 4 out of 5 stars. Useful as inspiration. The piety mechanic is something that's eminently blaggable for other games. The bestiary is useful. The rest of it, not so much unless you're running a campaign in Theros. Of course, the new races and so on are useful. It's pretty much exactly what you'd expect from a rather thin guide to a new world. So if you play D&D a lot, it's worth it. If you're planning a Theros campaign, it's worth it. If you want to nick the piety rules, the races and so on, you can find most of that information online from official sources, so it's probably not so much worth it. And in that case, still, if you play D&D a lot, yeah, I would bother. Zang. Tal, friend, and welcome to Gore. Savage and beautiful, John Norman's Gorean saga is brought to life in the Tales of Gore role-playing game and its companion world book, World of Gore. Take flight on a tarn, luxuriate in the bathhouses of Ar, pit your steel against the deadly Kuri, best your enemies and place them in your collar. Tales of Gore uses the D6 system, perfect for both new and old players. You can purchase it from Amazon, RPG Now, or Lulu.com. Ta Sada Gore!